Very, very grateful to be back at your home again, Vivek, with your wonderful family and all of your very special, exalted friends. Thank you, all of you, for coming this evening, allowing me the opportunity to see you and hopefully to serve you. I was once told that there's no real satisfaction to the heart in trying to be great, but there is in trying to be grateful. Grateful means full of greatness in one sense, because in the eyes of God, one who aspires to serve others is great, and one who wants to become great is very small. There's a beautiful verse in Srimad Bhagavatam. Savai pungshang paro dharmo yatho bhaktiradhok chajay ahoita ki aprati hatagya yatma suprasidati. When I first heard this verse, it had such an impact on me, because for so many years what I was trying to understand, trying to experience, was so much encapsulated in two short Sanskrit lines. The translation is, excuse me, it's amazing because in the heat more people, it used to be nobody did this, but in modern days more people get colds in the heat of the summer than any other time, because everybody has air conditioners on. No, it's perfect, Don't change it, please. It's not from here, it's from other place. So in this verse, the translation, the supreme occupation, or the supreme dharma. Dharma is also translated as religion. The supreme dharma, or religion, for all humanity yeah. The supreme dharma for all humanity is that which awakens loving devotional service to the Supreme Lord and compassion for all living beings. Such love, such service, and such compassion must be unmotivated by any selfish desires and uninterrupted by any situation that may come within the world, in order for that experience to completely satisfy our own self. Because everyone is ultimately looking to love and be loved. On the physical, on the mental platform, we try to find that in things and in various relationships, which could be very nice, but limited. But the Atma, the soul, its nature is to have that experience with God, to love God and to feel God's love. is the only nourishment that actually satisfies the heart. And when we understand how aham bija pratapita, Bhagavad Gita says that God is this Father of all living beings, where there is this awakening of love of God from the heart, then naturally it will manifest as love for all living beings, compassion for everyone. And in that compassion, we want to serve. We want to do something beneficial, actually beneficial for other people. And when that service attitude is motivated by love, not by prestige, pride, greed, ego, then it's unmotivated and uninterrupted. In this book that I recently wrote, The Journey Home, I write about an experience when I was sitting on a rock in the middle of the river Ganga, the Ganges River. For about 1 month I sat there from sunrise to sunset, trying to understand life by going deeper into myself and by studying the river. And one beautiful lesson I learned that I've never forgotten. I remember this lesson and apply it to my life almost every day. That was 40 years ago. I saw how the river, it begins way high in a glacier called Gomukh, near Gangotri. And it flows down from the Himalayas through the plains of India until over 1,000 miles later, it enters into the Bay of Bengal, which is like an ocean. And how the current of the Ganges, in its flow, sometimes there's gigantic rocks blocking its way, sometimes mountains, sometimes fallen trees. But the current of the river always finds its way around whatever may come in front of it. Either it goes over, under, or around the rocks, the mountains, the trees, toward its destination. So similarly, when we have an aspiration in life, whatever it may be, and the greatest aspiration, of course, is to enter the sea of God's love, there will be many obstacles. Obstacles from within, our own doubts, our own laziness, our own past conditionings and attachments to things that really are not beneficial to us. And there are so many impediments from without. It may be too hot, or it may be too cold, or maybe people are trying to destroy us, or maybe there might be government problems or social problems. There are numerous impediments that come on our path at any time. And if we're discouraged, if we give up, our progress is blocked. But all of us, if we have the will, the determination, and the faith, we will somehow or other go over, under, or around any impediment and continue making progress. In the Vedas, the Supreme Lord is called Bhavagrahi, which means doesn't see just what we do, but sees from within What is our purpose? What is the intent in which we do what we do? And if we do the right thing with the right intent, that is actually our success. Bhagavad Gita explains the physical acts that we perform, we may be successful or we may be failure. But if we do it with an intent of harming others, an intent of ego, false ego, or envy, even if we succeed in the eyes of men and women, in the eyes of God we failed. But even if we apparently fail to the world, if with great determination we really try our very best, with a good intent, with a divine intent, as an expression of our love, as an expression of our duty to God, then in God's eyes, we have fabulously succeeded. How to see the essence. A great soul is called saragrahi. That means one who is always looking for the essence of every situation that comes before us. And the essence is the opportunity. I'll tell one story. Did I tell this story last time? About the concentration camp? It's a horrible story. But it does have some very special wisdom that emerges from it. One of my very best friends, he's like a brother to me. He's of German descent. His name is Satchidananda Swami. He's a Swami, devotee of Krishna. And he told me this story. His father was in the SS of the Nazi regime, of Hitler's German army. And his father told him this story. A person he knew, one of his friends, he was working in a concentration camp. And he was in charge of bringing all of these people, most of them were Jewish people, and making them work. If they weren't fit, they would just be put into these gas chambers. And he said there was like a holding tank to put them in before they actually entered the gas chambers. And they knew that they were going to die, but they had no choice. So he told me that this friend of his father, as he was forcing them into the holding tank and then into the gas chambers where they were killed, then other Jewish people were forced by gunpoint to carry them out and bury them. Something very strange. Every now and then, he saw butterflies drawn on the wall. And this officer, he was wondering, why, like every few weeks, I see a butterfly or several butterflies on the wall? So he was asking them, but they never answered. They said, I don't know. But then finally, he asked one very old man who was about to be pushed into the gas chambers to die, what is the meaning of these butterflies I see from time to time drawn on the walls? He said, this is very meaningful to many of us. The story of a butterfly. Previously it was a caterpillar. And that caterpillar was on the ground, in the dirt, crawling around. And predators, at any minute somebody's going to step on it, or a bird's going to come and eat it. And the caterpillar's helpless to defend itself. But then it gets in a cocoon. The cocoon is like a prison, where it can't move, can't do anything. It's in darkness. But through that cocoon, the caterpillar emerges as a butterfly. It's no longer just in the ground, but is flying in the open, pure air of the sky. Rather than just eating dirt, it's going from flower to flower, drinking nectar. So this Jewish person said, because we have faith in God, we know that although you are treating us like this, and we're living in the dirt, and we're starving, and we know at any moment we're going to be beaten or killed like that caterpillar, and now we're in this prison which is like a cocoon. But because our faith in God, we know that we're going to be liberated, and we're going to fly in our Lord's heavenly abode, going from flower to flower, drinking nectar. But you, for the dastardly deeds that you are performing, your future is very dark, how you will have to suffer. Now, my friend told me that this man, he was programmed, brainwashed, conditioned by the regime to think the Jewish people had no souls, that they were less than animals, they had no conscience. Unless they were trained to think like this. And most of them joined when they were teenagers or something. They were programmed. And when you hear it enough, you believe it. Otherwise, how can you just kill people like this? But when he heard this man speaking such wisdom, with such faith, the story of the butterfly, this man was completely transformed. What am I doing? I have been cheated. These are the wisest, most sensitive people I've ever seen. This is the philosophy of some of them. And he realized that all that he had done was absolutely wrong. And for the rest of his life, he was having nightmares of being eaten by animals, and all the sufferings that he inflicted on others, or saw inflicted, practically every night was inflicted on him in his dreams. Now, interestingly, my friend, his father was some sort of an officer, and he was killing Jews. And my father, most of his relatives who were Jews, all of them were Jews, but most of his relatives were killed by the Nazis in Germany. No, I'm sorry, Lithuania. When the Nazis marched into Lithuania, they killed practically the entire Jewish race there. And most of my uncles and aunts and great-uncles and aunts were murdered. So here is a father of someone who killed Jews, and here is a father of someone, or a son of someone who was killed by the other's father. And yet, we're best of friends. How is that possible? We see in India, most of the disputes between Pakistan and India is what happened, the bad will that happened during the partition. In other countries, where things from generations back, they just can't forgive each other. Very fine. Very grateful that you have come. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I feel at home in your presence. Thank you. I feel at home in their presence too, because I'm Jewish American. And I feel at home with all of them because I live in India. Excuse me? Wonderful. My honor to meet you. So the story that we just told, it shows how based on a higher principle, there can be actual love, even between people who ordinarily, due to the past, would be bitter enemies. And the story of the butterfly also shows how there could be hope, where there's faith in the higher principle, a higher principle of God. There could be hope even in the most hopeless situation. There could be inner light even in the darkest conditions. Opportunities are always there for us to grow. Opportunities are always there for us to come closer to each other and closer to God, if we just look for them. One thing I learned in my travels is to be very cautious of judging things according to how they appear. Can I share another ghastly story in this regard? I was telling you how I was sitting on that rock in the Ganges for about a month. Sometime after that, I crossed the Ganges on the Lakshman-Julan Bridge in Rishikesh and traveled north in the Himalayas. I was alone. I had just come out of my teens. I was just 20 years old. I was walking. I just had one set of simple clothes like this. I had no money whatsoever. And I remember as I was walking through this forest pathway, what does destiny have in store for me? Because when you don't know where you're going, and you have no means except your feet to get there, and you don't know anyone, and you have no funds, it's really an experience where you're subjected to almost anything happening to you. And it makes life very fascinating. What will happen next? I'd like to tell you what happened next on that day. In the forest, I came to a clearing, and there I saw something that horrified me. There was a whole group of people in total poverty. Now, coming from the suburbs of Chicago, in Illinois of America. This was a major culture shock for me. There were people whose faces were decayed. Their noses were flat or holes. Their fingers were bloody stubs. Their toes were bloody stubs. Some of them were emaciated. All their flesh, it just looked rotten. Some had oozing sores all over them. Others were just dressed in rags. It was just the end of the winter, so it was cold. I saw a few of these people, just to keep warm, they dug holes in the ground and covered themselves with the dirt to keep from freezing. These people were homeless, in total poverty, and then I realized that I had just walked into a leprosy colony. You know, I saw lepers in movies when I was a little boy. They were always kept somewhere far from civilization because it was contagious. And I was thinking, I hope I don't catch leprosy. Suddenly, about 20 of them converged on me, surrounded me, and stuck their bloody stubbed hands in my face, shouting, "Bakshish, bakshish," which means give me a donation. But I honestly had nothing. I may have been healthier, but I had not more than them as far as funds. But they didn't, and I didn't speak their language, and they didn't speak mine. Their eyes were totally desperate. They were screaming at me, "Bakshish, bakshish." And they crushed their bodies against mine, all around me. I couldn't move. They wouldn't let me go. And I was thinking, so many contradictions in my mind. On one hand, why are they doing this to me? I just happen to be walking by. They won't let me go. And then I was thinking, considering how they're suffering, and considering how they're totally forsaken by the whole society, what they're doing is justified. How could I feel anything negative for them? All I could really feel is compassion toward them. And then I started thinking, well, maybe compassion is good, but will I get leprosy and end up here with them? It was a very confusing situation. I think it was about 20 minutes. They had me as their captive, begging for a donation. Until finally, one of them started patting me down to see if I actually had anything. They searched me. There wasn't much to search. And they discovered that I actually had nothing, except a simple walking stick and a little begging pot. So they dispersed and let me go. I walked a few steps and was stopped in my tracks. What I saw in front of my eyes. About 15 feet to my left was a very old lady. Even more severe than most of the others. She had no nose. It was just melted away. She had no fingers or toes. Her face was shriveled and rotten with disease. But in her eyes, she was looking at me. And our eyes locked as we stared at each other. And with her hands, she offered her pranams. In her eyes I saw the love of a mother. I could see it, I could feel it, I could hear it. Here was a woman who was absolutely alone and suffering. And ultimately, all that she wanted to do was love someone and have someone accept her love and reciprocate. The love of a mother. As we looked at each other, she saw that I was deeply moved by her glance. And then with her hand, she blessed me. All she wanted was someone, somewhere, to accept the motherly love that was in her heart before she died. I ran up to her, fell on my knees. She was laying down. She couldn't even sit up. I ran up to her and I put my head under her hand to receive that blessing she was giving. And as she rubbed the top of my head, I heard her say, in Hindi, but I could understand. She said, "May God bless you, my son. May God bless you, my son. May God bless you, my son." 3 times. And then I looked up, and she had the widest, most blissful smile on her face. And tears were pouring from her eyes. Tears of joy. The tears of giving. And it may sound strange, and it is strange, but when I was looking up at her, I was thinking, she's the most beautiful person I've ever seen. Her heart was truly beautiful behind that rotting flesh. After being with her for a few minutes, I took her leave, continued down the forest path, and there I once again sat on the bank of the Ganges. I looked at the current, and I was thinking, the Ganga here is very deep, but what am I seeing? I'm only seeing what's on the surface. I'm seeing some of the waves, I'm seeing some of the things that may be floating on the Ganga. But there's so much more. There's entire civilizations, or not civilizations, but families and communities of fish. And so much plant life. And so many beautiful stones of various colors. And of those fish who are swimming underneath the water, some are just born, others are adolescents just swimming around, others are mothers and fathers fish, some are predators eating others are eating plants. So much is happening. And then I recalled once how I was in California on the Pacific Ocean, on the seashore. And a school of dolphins were coming like this. And they were emerging from the water and then bending over and then going back into the water. I was thinking, there's so much going on in this ocean, but I'm only seeing what's coming to the surface. Then I focused back on the river Ganges. Isn't this our tendency? That we judge things by what we see, by what's on the surface, and we react to that. But beneath the surface of any human being, of any person, of any situation, there's so much more. And I was thinking in my own life, When I was in Turkey, people tried to kill me when I was hitchhiking to India. I was thinking about people who I really didn't like. Perhaps the reason they are the way they are, maybe they were abused. Maybe they were forsaken. Maybe they were terribly mistreated. There's so many reasons that a good person can become very bad. And if we try to see the cause and the reason why a person is the way they are, instead of being hateful, we will most often feel compassionate. We have a tendency to be so shallow, so superficial in this world. And even in situations that come upon us. We talked about the concentration camp and the persons who were drawing butterflies. They were seeing a beautiful opportunity in the most ghastly, deathly destiny. Because they had faith. Because they had hope. And because they had wisdom. Oftentimes, the most unwanted circumstance opens the doors to incredible achievements that could have never been accomplished without those reversals. It happens again and again and again. Then I thought back of that leper woman who I had just seen a few minutes before. On the surface, she was diseased, and she was the least type of person you would want to get near. But below the surface, she was one of the kindest, gentlest, loving, motherly people I had ever met. And all she wanted is someone to accept her affection. All she wanted to do is bless a child. A couple of years ago, I was in the redwood forests. Did you ever go to Muir Woods near San Francisco? And there were... Which part of America are you from?
Well, I'm from New York, but I used to work in National Park.
Really?
So I know the area.
Which part of New York?
Oh, upstate New York. I grew up in India.
In India? I'd love to hear how you grew up in Tamil Nadu. But we can discuss after maybe, if it's possible. I would love to. But when I was in Muir Woods, I happened to read something that was posted. And after reading it, it inspired me to do a little research. And it was fascinating. The wisdom one could learn by nature. It described that for about 50 years, no new redwood trees grew in that area. And this was something that was very great concern. Then they discovered why there wasn't any new redwood trees. It was because the forest rangers were doing their jobs too good. They were putting out every type of fire. And they realized for redwood trees to actually grow, it's very healthy to have minor fires. If not, it may prevent any new redwoods from growing at all. And then I read how it works. That the redwood seed is embedded in a redwood cone And that cone is a very hard, dry, like a wooden thing that's on the trees. And on its own, the redwood tree cannot escape from that cone. Something has to break the cone open for the seed to fall out. And fires, the heat of fires, crack the cones, and the seed falls out into the ground. Now, if there's all kinds of, it's a very sensitive seed, if there's all sorts of weeds and grasses and shrubs and bushes on the ground, then the seed can't take root. But not only does the fire break open the seed, but it burns away all the shrubs that are blocking the ground. So the seed could actually fall right directly in the ground. And when the seed is very, very young and it just starts to sprout, if there's too much sun, it could impede the seed from growing, even kill the sprout. But the ashes that are on the ground protect it at its initial state. And then when it starts growing more, it needs a lot of sun. And if there's so many trees over it, it can't get the sun. But the fire burns down all these other trees, except the really big redwood trees. And it gets the sun it needs. And also nourishes the soil. So here I was learning from this report from the forest rangers of Northern California how even though fires are such a disturbance, from the pressures of this fire, the tree is growing. To see the opportunity, to see the possibility, even in apparently difficult circumstances. And in spiritual life, it's interesting, because I studied many religions. Very wonderful to see you. I wish you a very, very safe journey back to Israel, the Holy Land, and I hope to see you again very soon. Thank you very much. We're honored by your coming. So fascinated by redwood trees, I went to the Kings Canyon, which has the biggest redwood trees in the world, sequoia trees. And one such tree is the General Grant tree. Did you see that one? I'll tell you some things about the General Grant tree. This is what I read. The size of this tree, if 20 grown adults were to hold their hands, that's how many it would take to go around the tree. It's the widest tree in the world. It's in Northern California. And if you put 150,000 fully inflated basketballs, if you hollowed out the General Grant tree, you can put 150,000 fully inflated basketballs in the tree. Or you can put 2.5 million ping pong balls in it, table tennis balls. It's a big tree. But I saw in that tree, there were major parts of it that were scorched black. Because that tree, according to the scientists, is 1,700 years old. And how many forest fires that tree stood there and just kept growing and growing and growing. And the black scorches on its side is actually like an ornament. It just kept growing and getting bigger and stronger despite all these fires and obstacles. It's a testimony. This is actually what it means to be great. To keep growing internally, even in the most trying circumstances, even in the most difficult circumstances. And we see throughout history, the greatest men that we read about are people who went through that, who never gave up hope. Then I went close by, there is the General Sherman tree, which is the largest tree on the planet. General Grant is number 3. General Sherman tree is so big, it says you could, if you hollowed it out and filled it with water, for something like 2.5 years, a whole family could take a full bath. And if a 6-foot man looks up at that tree, it's exactly the same experience as if a mouse looks up at a 6-foot man. Things are very relative. Again, many black scorch marks on that tree. Despite all difficulties, all reverses, it chose to keep growing and growing and growing. So real greatness is to see the opportunity, the positive opportunity in whatever situation may come upon us. And real spiritual life is to see the opportunity ultimately to come closer to God in every situation.